Hello everyone, welcome back to the International Business Podcast. It's been a long time since the last episode. It's been 2 years. On the same week, 2 years ago, I received a double promotion. The first one, by large, the most important one, to father. I have an amazing baby boy now. The second, I took over as head of sales and digital, all Asia Pacific, including mainland China. Now we're back to podcasting, and I am incredibly excited about it. There hasn't been a single day without listeners. That is awesome. What do we do today? Today we focus on a very important topic, one-on-one meetings. What are they? What is their purpose? What are some tips to increase their effectiveness? And indeed, some specific examples and stories. All of this in the usual fashion of the International Business Podcast, by having professionals from all over the world, people that work across time zones, cultures, and borders. For more details on each guest, including their LinkedIn profiles, please check the show notes. Let's define one-on-one meetings with Francis, who goes by the sentence German quality, Chinese speed. He is vice president at JULI Automation, Chinese market leader for EV motor assembly lines. He is also the founder of the China Flexpat Community.
One-on-one meetings are time spent together between two people. So basically one person I'm working with on a specific project or to-do. This is different from a group meeting because we only spend time with each other, and this helps us to better exchange our ideas with each other, to learn from each other, but also to be open and safe to share our individual feedback.
Sally is an award-winning cross-cultural public relations strategist. In 2015, she founded 11K Consulting, a leading London-based China specialist communications consultancy.
To me, one-on-one meetings are one person to one person, two people meetings. And it is really a way to have deep conversations, to try to solve a problem, discover something together, or bond together.
We started in China, we moved to the UK, and now let's move to the US with Tom, expert in the intercultural complexities of global leadership. Tom is the principal and founder of Kremer Leadership International. The company helps multinational companies and their expat leaders find success faster.
How do I define one-to-one meetings? I define them as critical, mission critical, especially in the intercultural context, in the intercultural business world that I work in with my clients. The one-to-one meeting becomes one of the most important ways to extend understanding and positive intent, because sometimes in group settings with translation, both language translation and cultural translation, it becomes very difficult to ferret out meaning. So one-to-one meetings become very, very critical. The Japanese have a term called nemoashi, which means kind of tending the soil before the big meeting happens and before growth can occur. And that concept rings true with one-to-one meetings, because in the big decision-making meetings, so much needs to happen beforehand, and that's where I spend a lot of my time with clients.
Let's deep dive a bit more with Tom, who is looking at one-on-one meetings from an intercultural standpoint. Do languages and cultural barriers increase the challenges of these meetings?
One-to-one meetings take on a completely different context when we're looking at it from an intercultural standpoint, which is kind of my center of expertise. The fact remains that everything, when dealing with language barriers, but also business cultural barriers, takes 2 to 3 times as long if you want to make sure that the context of the meeting is good and provides the right balance between communication and listening, etc. The hardest part for me is to slow down what I'm doing. Not only slow down what I'm saying so that it can be understood, but also slow down my thinking process so that I'm really understanding what the person is saying to me. And these one-to-one meetings are seriously critical for making sure that you maintain and create psychological trust, as well as just a good breeding ground for great communication.
We do have a better understanding of what these meetings are. Now, why do we do one-on-one meetings with team members and clients? What is their purpose? Not knowing the why of any business interaction is a huge mistake. One-on-one meetings are not to be done for the sake of it. You don't do them simply because HR told you to do so. You don't do them simply because your boss told you to do so. So, what is the specific reason then? Let's fly to Japan to meet Jason. He is the president of corporate training firm Idea Development in Tokyo. During his 30 years as a consultant in Asia, he's helped more than 40,000 people communicate, manage, and work better across languages and cultures.
I've lived and worked in Japan for the last 30 years or so I'm kind of focusing on that. But basically, this should be relevant to many cultures where you have hierarchy, harmony is important, and in many cases, your team is non-native English speakers. In that situation, the purpose of one-on-one, let's look at it for you and for your team members. For you, typically, you can understand your reports, which oftentimes isn't that easy. More importantly, you can identify blind spots, which a lot of times, by definition, we don't see and end up causing us trouble later. And of course, you can develop relationships, which tend to be much more important than we're used to. But I would say the real benefit of one-on-one is actually for the people that work with you, because they get to ask questions that oftentimes they're afraid to ask, they're too shy, or if they're very sensitive of harmony in the context, well, maybe they can never find the right time to do that. Another thing is they can talk about topics that they feel uncomfortable bringing up in front of other people or maybe in more formal situations. And finally, one of the most important things is they can feel understood. And this is a much bigger concern for people, particularly from high context cultures, because they're not so used to explaining their ideas 100%. Or they see that when they talk, maybe you're not getting the whole story, but they feel bad following up and explaining specifically in a way that you do. At any rate, one-on-one does have a benefit for you and the reports if done well.
Jason opened up a massive topic of high context and low context cultures. This could easily be the topic of an entire podcast. Let's keep this concise by simply becoming aware of how important it is to study and understand, hopefully, cultures you're dealing with. There are invisible boundaries that divide our world, in the words of Erin Meyer, author of the book The Culture Map. Knowing the differences between cultures is the starting point. The next one is to analyze the positioning of one culture relative to another. This is complex, and this is what we're trying to do with this podcast by inviting international business people. Jason is an American, albeit having lived in Japan for 30 years, who is dealing with a local team and multinational companies at the same time. Examples like these are fascinating. Moving on, let's get practical for the audience. Let's hear some tips on how to run effective one-on-one meetings.
I try to make myself available most of the time to the people who work with me. They are not really my direct reports. They are people who work on projects which are very important to me. And they can reach out to me anytime. This means because of time zones or different schedules, we don't schedule time together on our agenda, but rather I share ideas by WeChat and I know when this other person is available to feedback to me. And then we start having a chat on WeChat or a chat on some other chat application. And whenever we schedule time to spend with each other in a one-on-one meeting, then we base on this conversation. So we don't start from zero, we don't spend a lot of time to discuss where we start, but we rather focus on an area which we have been discussing for quite some time before, and this makes it much more efficient. This is also why it's so important that it's a one-on-one meeting and not a group meeting. So I don't schedule regular meetings with people I work with. I rather try to be available, and when we have the chance to meet, we go right in and discuss the topic which is most pressing to both of us and which we have been already exchanging lots of ideas about.
When I do one-on-one in Japan, the three things I try to keep in mind is first, make sure that both sides have clear expectations that they agree on. If we're not careful in a major power difference culture, what's going to happen is the manager is going to give a one-way lecture to the report. They're going to sit there, pretend they're listening, nod their head, and when it's over, nothing good has happened. So what I try to do is clarify the expectations by saying one-on-one is not a place for problem solving, it's not for negative feedback, and it's not for specific direction and teaching from the manager. I try to make sure that reports know that it's all about them talking. They're in charge. They need to prepare the content, the topics, and they need to lead the discussion. With that start, it doesn't work out perfectly at the beginning, but at least we understand what the goal is. The second thing is to focus on understanding and relationship more than tasks, action, and result. So for a manager, you really need to focus on listening and asking questions. What you shouldn't do is don't push for action. Don't try to force a conclusion. Don't try to jump with lots of ideas and solutions. Let's try to understand what they're thinking and build a relationship, because these are things that are hard to do in a different environment. The third thing is sometimes it's useful to change the setting or the environment. Particularly in a high context culture like Japan, people are extremely sensitive to who is around, what is the atmosphere or the feeling of the place, what is the location. And these types of setting or environmental elements have a much bigger influence on what is said, what is done, how it's interpreted, than many people realize. For that reason, if you have a little variety, standing, sitting, in the office, out of the office, with food, without food, etc., by changing the environment, you can get a different feel and different variation. However, it often helps to make sure that you tell them first, because nasty surprises is something that no one likes. In short, clarify the expectations, focus on understanding and relationship, and change the environment as needed.
Interesting here. Francis, who works in China, does not schedule meetings. He rather chats with other people on WeChat, then calls for meetings to discuss the very specific topic on hand. In contrast, me, also in China, schedule all the meetings with my local team, whether they're one-on-one or team meetings. This is a perfect example of how different approaches could be used within the same context culture. I will do a specific podcast on my method in scheduling and running one-on-one meetings. There is never a single answer. Business isn't black or white, and this is so much better. Let's stick to Francis to hear what his take on feedback, precisely on how to give feedback.
We should not judge other people by our own standards, our own benchmark. Rather, we should study other people's benchmark and then try to understand it and learn from it and really feel how they make decisions and why. And only after we have finished this, we can give feedback. So in my case, I work with lots of really different professionals from different parts of the world, and they all have a different style of working. So for me, the most important question is, how is this person working and making decisions? Why is this person working this way? And how can I learn from this person? And what is something which makes it difficult for me to work with this person? And if there is something like this, how can I express that the cooperation between us is suffering because of this area? So this means that I spend a lot of time with myself before I share my feedback. And I think this is very important. So generally, I share lots of positive feedback, things which help me to do my job because of this other person. And I don't share any or very little negative feedback before I spend a lot of time by myself studying this other person.
If you are an old-time listener of the show, you know I love asking for a specific story to our guests. And today we focus on a bad experience with one-on-one meetings.
About a bad experience I had in my career with such meetings. Yes, I think there are actually a lot of time wasted one-on-one meetings because people don't come prepared with what they want, not fully attentive during the meetings, or just simply not opening up. I guess actually having that face-to-face one-on-one meetings are so special that we should really try to maximize those opportunities to show our concerns, to show who we are, and to be clear about what we want.
Losing attention during meetings is a big one. I am committed, but honestly do not succeed every time, to removing the phone and the laptop while on a meeting. And I ask my team member to do the same. No distractions. Let's hear again from Tom.
So many instances that come to my mind when asked about a bad experience I had in my career with these types of meetings. I think they all kind of blend together, but usually the worst is when there's a certain sense of urgency on the proceedings, and the proceedings are taking place both in different languages, but also in different business cultures. In one instance, I was sitting behind one of my most trusted people. She was unfairly assigned the job to translate for me, which is not, her area of expertise. And the meeting became kind of heated with a lot of ideas floating around, and she could not keep up, which was not her fault. It's not her area of expertise. So I became more and more frustrated, and I pushed back very hard. And as normal, when translation occurs, I was about 2 topics behind, and so it confused the entire room. I was a lot younger then and probably a little bit more hot-headed than I am now. And I remember becoming kind of angry at her about the situation, which was totally unfair. And I apologized to her much later on down the road. But to keep your emotions in check during these times when communication gets heated is really tough sometimes. And in this particular case, I allowed kind of the emotion of the moment as well as the urgency of the moment kind of supersede my own common sense when it came to intercultural discussion best practices. So it's really difficult. And in our realm of cross-cultural communication, you just have to be so careful. By being careful, I don't mean being overly cautious and not communicating. I just mean being super self-aware of yourself, how you're communicating, but also how you're listening. Even more importantly, how you're listening and making sure you're in the right spot before you comment or push somebody.
Translation is another vital issue, a big topic which could deserve an entire podcast, to be honest. That's it for today. You can find the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. Subscribe, do not miss the upcoming episodes. Leave a review if you enjoy the show. This helps us to grow and produce more content for you. If you want to come on the show, connect with me on LinkedIn. Cheers for now.